How will the decision south of the border impact the abortion debate here in Canada? We are going to speak to both advocates on both sides of this issue. First, Josie Luetke is the co-youth coordinator of Campaign Life Coalition. She's in Hamilton. Josie, how significant is today's decision out of the United States?
It's incredibly significant. For 49 years, we pro-life advocates have been waiting for something like this. This is the most momentous day that we've had in decades, and countless lives will be saved. I know a lot of people will really resent this decision, and I understand that. But at the same time, there will be children who are born months from now who would otherwise have been killed. So I think today is incredibly important, and hopefully that this is a start of a journey that will hopefully be short on the way to prohibiting all abortions, not only in the United States, but also in Canada.
I do want to ask you about Canada in a second, but I'm very interested to get your perspective in about how we came to this point in the United States. Obviously, the judicial system and the political system are quite different from ours. But what is the takeaway, I guess, from your perspective about this result and the campaign and the efforts to get there?
I think the takeaway is perseverance. The takeaway is that all action goes towards the purpose. So you have local activists who've been fighting at the state level. I've been to the Washington, D.C. March for Life with hundreds of thousands of other pro-lifers there. People who have fought, sometimes they've just entered the movement. Some of them have been in the movement their whole lives, basically. And I think that a lot of them, when they started, they didn't imagine this day would come. But here it has. And the payoff is so sweet. Again, knowing that there will be children alive thanks to this decision. So I think that the takeaway is that even when our goal seems impossible, that we just need to continue. And if you're fighting to end a human rights injustice, it's always worthwhile, even when it seems like we're facing insurmountable odds.
As we discussed, the situation, though, very different in Canada and the U.S. in terms of the political system, in terms of the judicial system. So what do you think the implications are for anti-abortion advocates such as yourself here in Canada?
Well, I definitely hope to see the abortion debate reignited. I think a lot of people are talking about it. And I hope they'll also consider what abortion is and what it does, which is kill an innocent human being. I hope to be able to have these conversations with friends and family members, neighbors. And I hope that consideration also allows us to examine Canada's law, or rather lack thereof, because we have zero protection for the preborn in Canada. A woman can have an abortion at any point in pregnancy for any reason or no reason whatsoever. She can have as many abortions as she'd like, and they're all taxpayer funded. And the majority of Canadians actually disagree with this status quo. They think that things like sex selective abortion, aborting a baby girl just because she's a baby girl, that should be illegal.
Well, in fact, the polling, sorry, Josie, to interrupt you, but the polling that I've seen from groups like Angus Reid, Ipsos Reid, Maru, all show that the majority of Canadians support the status quo in terms of not legislating on abortion in Canada.
Yeah, so the majority of Canadians are really ignorant about what the actual legal situation is in Canada. So when you ask them about specific policies, like on sex selective abortion, 84% of Canadians want sex selective abortion prohibited. So I think
what is the specific opinion poll that you're pointing to? Is that's work that's been done by your group, or you say 84%?
No, Dart and Maru Blue from 2020 said 84%. But there's also been plenty of polling leading up to that indicated that. Again, the sentiment has always been that something like sex selective abortion is terrible and shouldn't be allowed in Canada.
Okay. I want to ask you, again, you say, as you point out, there is no law that limits access to abortion in Canada. But part of the reaction here in Canada to even the draft decision of Roe v. Wade is a discussion in some quarters about potentially implementing a law, but in this case, one that would ensure that women have access to abortion. Are you concerned that, in fact, this situation in the United States might set back the purposes of your organization here in Canada?
We're very concerned, knowing who our Prime Minister is, Justin Trudeau. Ever since he became leader of the Liberal Party, he has made it very clear that his priority is abortion, both promoting it here in Canada and overseas. So we're definitely aware of that possibility. In fact, we already have a petition in opposition to any attempt, whether it's legislative or otherwise, to enshrine abortion as a right here in Canada. I think we at least appreciate that there's a recognition there that abortion is not a right currently in Canada. Abortion is commonly referred to as a right by Justin Trudeau, but our own precedent, the Morgenthaler decision, did not, in fact, declare abortion a right. So in that sense, I guess that's the silver lining. But again, we are aware of that possibility, and we will fight very vigorously against any attempts to declare the killing of an innocent human being a right, because it absolutely is not.
Now, you, as you say, you are very much at cross purposes with the Prime Minister. We know that he has support from the NDP when it comes to his broader political agenda. I wonder, when your organization looks at where it might be able to achieve its means, where do you see that movement happening? Is it on the federal level? Like, where would you roll back abortion access?
So we do work at all levels of government, municipal, provincial, and federal. There is a Conservative Party of Canada leadership race right now. We are supporting pro-lifer Leslyn Lewis. So I think that's our immediate hope, is that she get elected the leader of the party, and then eventually prime minister down the road. So we can have a pro-life prime minister. Of course, we'll also need to elect pro-life MPs if we're ultimately going to see a ban on abortion. I mean, certainly it's going to be a long road there, even if we prefer it be shorter. But also, I think recognizing that this shouldn't be a political issue. So we hope for a day when all pro-life MPs come from different parties, including the NDP, including the Liberals. That used to be the case in the past. It's rather unfortunate that only one mainstream party is open to participation from pro-lifers currently, but we hope that will change.
I want to leave this on a thought about what's happening in the United States. You had President Biden saying this isn't over. I wonder what your sense is. At the same time, you know, we have these trigger laws that are likely to change the situation in a number of states immediately. But what is your sense of what happens next? Not only in the United States, but here. Where do things go from here as there is this push and pull over this issue?
Yeah, we'll definitely see state level battles in the United States. It'll be interesting to see what Biden decides to do, especially considering that midterms are coming up. Again, I think that there isn't an appetite for abortion on demand, as the Democrats are pushing for it. I think that actually makes them out of line with a lot of where Americans stand. The Democratic Party, I think, has moved further and further left on that issue. And most Americans do not support the idea of abortion in all circumstances, which is the party's current position. So we'll have to see on that. Again, I think that local grassroots efforts are going to be very effective. And I think we'll also start to see abortion advocates much more reinvigorated in terms of fighting politically. Here in Canada, as you mentioned, there's that possibility that Justin Trudeau, in an attempt to virtue signal, will respond, even though it's an American decision to want to differentiate Canada from the United States. But again, we're really looking forward to those conversations that regular people are going to have with their friends and family members. And we hope that this will hopefully encourage more politicians to put forward pro-life policies that not only will protect lives, but that most Canadians are in agreement with.
Frédérique Chabot speaks for Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights, previously known as the Planned Parenthood Federation of Canada. We certainly want to talk about the Canadian repercussions in a moment, but first I want to ask you, Frédérique Chabot, about the historic significance of what happened in the United States today. What do you think that is?
The ripple effects of these decisions will be immense. This is a really big day, and we were, expecting that it was going to happen. We had seen a draft of the decision in early May, but it was still shocking this morning to read the exact wording of the decision and to take in what the consequences will be for decades to come.
As I said, I do want to talk about what this means for Canadians. And I know your organization has noted that there are a number of Canadian women who go to the United States to access abortion later in their pregnancy. So what do you expect the decision on Roe v. Wade to mean for those women?
This will effectively end the access to abortion in the U.S. for Canadian women because, of course, there's going to be some states that effectively ban abortion immediately starting today. So there were trigger laws that were in place that as soon as Roe v. Wade was going to be overturned, that were ready to be put in place to ban abortion in over half of the states in the United States. Some states will still have abortion clinics and be able to offer abortion care to their populations, but there's going to be an influx of people from states where abortions will be banned that will go to these haven states. And so time and wait times will increase, and it will just not be sustainable for people in Canada to try to access those points of services.
People at home may be wondering why Canadian women are going to the United States to access abortion. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. The majority of abortion happen in the first trimester, and so upward of 95% happen before 12 weeks. And so these are services that are available in Canada, but beyond a certain gestational point, while it is allowed for Canadians, there's no restrictions imposed by criminal laws in Canada in terms of when you can access abortion. Services may not be available. And so while it is an insured medical service, something that people in Canada have a right to, they may not be able to access it here, so they have to travel to go access it in the United States, paid by the government, by their medical insurance, because this is a service they're entitled to.
How many women are we talking about that are now, for instance, per year, might we expect no longer to be able to access those abortions in the United States?
It's not a huge number of people. We don't have an exact number. This is not tracked exactly by every province, but we know that when people are later on in their pregnancy, often it's for very complex, either health reasons or psychosocial reasons. So because of reasons like homelessness or domestic violence, immigration complications. There are a lot of reasons why people may not have been able to access services earlier. And so they are already vulnerable. And so when the corridor to services close for these people, we are talking about the most marginalized of people.
But are we talking about dozens of women per year, hundreds, thousands? I know you say there aren't specific numbers, but to get a
probably closer to in the hundreds.
Okay. I also want to talk about the flow of people from the other side of the border. What do you think about the prospect that American women might travel to Canada for an abortion? Is that likely?
We don't have much information just yet about that kind of flow that will come from the U.S. to Canada. This is something that we will monitor at clinics that are closer to states where people will need to travel. We think an educated guess is that many people from the U.S. will travel to U.S. states, but if there's a closer Canadian city where they can access services, it is possible that they may cross the border to access either medical abortion or surgical abortion at clinics or hospitals.
Let's talk about access for Canadian women in Canada. I should note that your group recently received about $2 million from the federal government to try to address this issue. But broadly, how are we doing in terms of access to abortion in Canada?
There are big discrepancies in terms of accessibility for people in Canada. So there's different numbers of services in different provinces. There's different restrictions that are in place in some provinces. For example, New Brunswick's abortion are only covered in hospitals. And so there is only 2 to 3 points of service for the whole province. And elsewhere, people have to pay out of pocket. A lot of people in Canada end up having to travel for their appointment, and this is the funding that Action Canada received. It's to continue to build our abortion access fund, as well as the program where we offer Canadians a phone line where they can call if they have questions in terms of accessing sexual and reproductive health services.
The federal government says it is committed to ensuring equitable access. We know it was an election promise to put regulations in place to ensure that access. How would you say the federal government is doing on that front?
The federal government has made many efforts to increase access to abortion over the last years. They have communicated their desire to work on this issue. They have made a historic announcement in federal budgets in terms of access to sexual and reproductive health services across Canada. There is more that needs to be done. There's also a lot of work that must be done by provinces and territories because health is a provincial jurisdiction. And so this is in partnership with the federal government. Province and territories need to work together to ensure equitable access to everyone on their territories. As the Canada Health Act, the law that oversees insured health services, directs, there are 5 principles that are enshrined into law as the Canada Health Act, and one of them is accessibility. And when we have provinces where half of the points of service are, like in Quebec, or provinces where there's one or two in major urban centers, we're not talking about equitable access to services across the board.
So it sounds to me like you're saying that your message to the federal government would be to do more?
To continue working on this issue. So one thing that we must point out, so there's been talks and pressure put on the federal government to introduce legislation to enshrine the right to abortion in Canada. This is not a position that we support. We have everything we need at the moment. What we need is political will and continued support to enforce the Canada Health Act. In Canada, abortion is healthcare, as it should be. And so it is not regulated by a civil law, or we do not need to reopen the charter, as it was already interpreted that abortion was a right in Canada. And there's too many unintended consequences that could come from introducing legislation where restrictions could be imposed, either now compromising with different groups that want to be part of the conversation about a law, or by later governments that could actually instead of preventing what is happening in the United States, would accelerate it. And so in Canada, we have a model that is regarded highly all over the world. We are regulating abortion as a healthcare procedure, as it should be.
You talked at the beginning about ripple effects in the United States of this decision, but what do you think ultimately the ripple effects are likely to be on the conversation around this issue in Canada, around the political conversation?
Right. Well, the ripple effects everywhere when there are restrictions that are imposed on human rights and abortion rights can go on for decades. So there is a study that was done in the United States called the Turnaway Study that looks at the consequences that people experience when they do not receive the abortion that they want and need. And it goes on for generations, because we're talking about impacts on families. We're talking about impacts on the children of those people who were denied an abortion. We're talking about poor economic status, about people staying in situations of domestic violence, people who are in situations of poverty years later because of not having had access to services that they needed to plan their families. And so this is a political conversation that we need to be having as a global community. When we see retrogression on human rights like this, this is something that we should all be concerned about. We need to continue to fight for the upholding of our human rights. This is very concerning. This is, of course, a conversation that is also relevant in Canada. We have a government right now who has pledged to do more to increase accessibility of abortion care. This is a conversation that needs to continue, because there's still a lot of work to be done to enforce the Canada Health Act better, to ensure that every provinces is doing what they need to be doing to ensure access to reproductive care services. Because if we have a right to something that is just not accessible, it means nothing.
Okay. We're going to leave the discussion there for today. Thank you for your perspective.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.